Welcome to the Levy and Associates Calibration Point Podcast. Our podcasts are designed to bring a conversational exploration of key topics that we believe will provide value and insight to those serving in the nonprofit sector. We will highlight new developments in the field, latest research, and things we're learning from our own clients that we can share.
Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to this edition of the Calibration Point Podcast. And in this edition, I was asked to do a short overview of an executive director health and wellness assessment that we do on an annual basis. So I will be the guest for this edition of the Calibration Point Podcast. We are going to do a brief exploration of the findings, some of the key findings of this executive director assessment overview. We do this annually. We've done it for a number of years now, pre and post COVID, and we've tracked findings. The assessment is national in scope, and we survey executive directors of nonprofit organizations where we are following a common set of metrics in organizations to see how those organizations are faring. And I have gone through and pulled together some of the more critical ones, the ones that I think are going to be universal to a broader audience as well, and thought we would spend our time today kind of exploring and unpacking those since I had a few requests for that. A few things I wanted to highlight just out of the start of this assessment is one of the indicators that has been very relevant, and a question that we track is on a number of different depletion metrics, physically, mentally, emotionally, creatively. And what we found, and emotional and general well-being is a part of that. But we have seen a major drop-off in those areas of depletion, meaning that they've become more and more relevant post-COVID, and we have not seen a tremendous turnaround in those areas or those dynamics of depletion or getting to a point of some sense of renewal. And I would say the highlight or the top line I would put on that is that across the board, leaders are still telling us that they feel stretched and they feel a multidimensional strain by way of mental, emotional, and creative domains. This mirrors last year's assessment, and it mirrors pretty well every assessment we've done post-COVID. When we ask questions about operational hurdles or major challenges, we're seeing identical responses in the 2026 assessment compared to the findings of the last assessment we did. And that is that, number one, funding challenges. We've seen tax policy changes. We've seen federal funding changes. We've seen a change in how donors are giving, foundations, corporations, and number one hurdle that's identified in this assessment are funding issues. Number two, volunteer shortages. We find that the majority are still experiencing drop-offs from pre to post-COVID volunteer numbers. That was echoed again in this year's assessment. And then demands on leaders' time continues to be a major source of challenge. And then alignment within the organization, alignment of donor expectations, alignment of programming strategy with the needs or desires, I should say, of funders, and then alignment issues of the board and staff to the right focus of the mission and vision. Those were identified last year. They are identified again as the number 4 biggest operational hurdle. When we ask questions about the board, a couple of highlights around there are that board support is high, as indicated by these executive directors, yet they still feel a struggle as leaders. One of the bigger issues that we receive or we see kind of repetitively in this assessment, even pre-COVID, is the idea of follow-through. Executive directors talking about the issue of assigning board items, board tasks, and then questioning or wondering, did board members actually follow through with that task? And then the executive director following back up to make sure it was done, and just identifying the inefficiency on their time and the increased impact of their time because they can't assign something and then just feel confident that they know that was addressed. Having said that, board support, do you have a supportive board, has increased over the last 2 years. However, the question of do you feel lonely as an executive director, while that has gotten stronger, it was almost 40% in 24, 25. That question, that metric right now still is hovering around 17 to 20%. Still something we need to be concerned of if I'm a board member who's listening to this. We have a number of assessment metrics around organizational capacity. So I just want to identify a couple of those. One question we've been tracking very heavily is, are you at full capacity staff-wise? The 2024-25 assessment, 62% of organizations said that they were at full staff capacity. The 26 assessment showed that only 27% say they are at full capacity. So we do have a big gap of people needing to be able to find the right people. A question on, are you planning to lay off or furlough staff? In the last assessment, 20% said yes. This last assessment, 10% said yes. Have you regained volunteers? We're running pretty well similar to last assessment, and that was at 62% said yes, we have. And this last one we just did, 63% said yes, they have. What I would take away from that is that when you look at the drop in staff capacity, we do see the continued struggles on developing volunteer capacity. And we also see the resource questions, and we can pretty well derive from that understanding that nonprofit leaders are definitely doing more with fewer resources, even though the demand is growing on their services. Number of metrics we talk about leadership development, leadership health. One of the core questions I thought I would highlight is the question of, are you considering leaving as the executive director? In 2026, 24% said they are likely to change jobs this year, and 32% said that they are seriously considering leaving this year, but they're not seeking. The last assessment we did, that number was 12% were likely to change jobs and 43% were considering leaving. So what we're finding is that the likelihood of an executive director changing jobs this year has gone up, but the seriously considering has gone down. Maybe that means that while we have fewer who are considering, those that are finding it easier to exit. And so they're planning that they're going to exit. And so we see the increase in that. It does indicate a more chronic instability in organizations, in that we're continually seeing that executive directors in one form or another are weighing their exit strategies. And it's important for a board to understand, as we've talked before on different podcasts, the topics that we've done, the number one reason that executive directors leave is because of the board, and the board chair executive director relationship is one of the most critical litmus tests on the board. And care for the executive director, is the position doable? Are we supporting them? Do they feel alone? Do they have peers? Are we giving them margin? These are all important questions that a board really should be driving when we think about the health of the executive director. We could cascade these into the health of other positions, but right now we are focused on specifically the executive director. We ask a whole host of questions around boards and donors, and I just want to highlight a couple of those. And one that's really important, and that is this last assessment, executive directors said when they were asked, what do they wish their boards understood more of? Number one, top, which has been the case for a number of annual assessments we've done, is that they say they wish their boards understood or could better relate to what's required of them to be a successful executive director. Number two, they wish their boards would help more in fundraising. 61% according to the board source indexes say that board members 61% of board members have a role in fundraising, but the vast majority of board members' role in fundraising is special events. Executive directors need help building advocates. They need help managing relationships. They need board members who will identify not the 60 people on their Rolodex or their contact list, but they need help finding the 5 who really care about the cause, that deserve to know, that want to be connected to things of similar value, and being a partner with the executive director and helping to make those connections and to be a voice for the mission and the vision of the organization. Number 3, they identified that they wish board members better understood the importance of investing in the future of leadership within the organization, not just them as an executive director, but any other position that they are developing or need to develop. And then number 4 was they wish their boards better understood the need for them to be engaged and supportive in governance. And this circles back to the comment that I made earlier when we talked about board executive directors wishing that their board was better on accountability and follow through. If something gets assigned out, that they just know it's going to be done. And this also reflects back on the number 4 point. This mirrors almost exactly the last time we did this assessment. One thing we also identified in that series of questions was a question about donor misunderstandings. And in this last one, when we ask, what do you wish your donors better understood? And that was the impact of their giving, the mission of the organization, and the purpose. Last time we did the assessment, when we asked that question, the executive directors reported that they wish donors better understood the financial needs of the organization, but impact and mission. Impact and mission help us paint the picture for financial investment. What I would take away from that is that donor education, donor awareness, our focus on building advocates as donors is still number 1. It's paramount. We have to, and that's a team sport. That's board, that's staff, that's executive director, being able to come together collectively to say, what's the outcome we want with people we're building relationships, our donors, our volunteers, our constituency partnerships, people in the community, and focus on helping people understand the impact they have or can have, our mission and vision, and how they are part of our story. A few things that have not changed as well, and that was that overall, just kind of a top line, funding and volunteer shortages still are top barriers. Leadership time depletion in those core areas we talked about, board misunderstanding or alignment, and then donor clarity. Like these things continue to permeate every time we do this assessment. And I want to be sure and kind of bring this to a closure with that understanding. A few things that have become more positive since the last time we did this assessment is that we did see as I mentioned earlier, a significant decrease in the sense or feeling of loneliness by executive directors, and board support is high. And I want to be clear on that. I can have strong board support and feel that I am cheer-led by my board, but that's different than being affirmed and or valued within my board. A few things I want to bring up too, just as another close that I want to make sure we don't lose track of, and that is the need for board members to be really attuned to the well-being of their executive directors. And also, I think for all of us as we're listening to this, we talk about staff, is to remember when we turn over staff, there is a tremendous hard and soft cost to the organization. A colleague of mine wrote an article one time for a journal, and that was, if you want to raise more money, figure out how to manage turnover of staff. And there's so much truth to that. The numbers are big when you factor in hard and soft costs. And unfortunately, in my humble perception in this sector, being a lot of decades here, is that we often view staff as disposable, and we turn staff over way too easy in this sector without understanding the gravity of those decisions and the precedent that we're setting. So I would say for everybody who's listening to this overview, remember that about staff, remember that about the executive director. Is the position doable? A lot of the questions that we see concerns about come back to that role not truly being doable by the executive director. And then whenever we have to go to market to find a successor for that person, oftentimes it's not doable, or we're looking at 2 positions instead of 1. Big picture as well, leaders, we ask questions about your future outlook. And I am always amazed when I do this assessment, especially at some of the darker times coming out of COVID, leaders, despite everything they were dealing with, still paint this wonderfully optimistic and hopeful outlook for their organization and for the sector as a whole. And we saw that again in the open-ended comments and questions, even with the structural barriers, even with staffing challenges, even with burnout, exhaustion. There's the context of how leaders were sharing about what they view the coming year about for their organizations was still very positive and moving into 2027, which again undergirds why a strong board, why donor education, building not just capacity, but building capability within our organizations and developing really healthy pipelines of leadership growth. Whether that's a frontline position or my executive director, those are really very critical elements to pay attention to and to be sure we understand. And I would also close that with the understanding that our donor, our volunteer are all part of the theory of change in a social sector organization. Our staff, our boards, our collaborative partners, if we have them, they all come together with one core focus. I need to help equip them as advocates so that they can be a voice for those that we're serving, that they can live out and carry the mission and the vision of my organization forward and bring the care and excellence that the people we serve demand and deserve. I hope you find this helpful. Again, I wanted to do just a brief overview since there's a lot more to this assessment, but a little too much for a 15-minute podcast. But I was asked if I would do a quick overview and felt that it would be good for podcast topics for Calibration Point and give you something to listen to and just reflect on as you're thinking about whether you're a board member, staff member, volunteer, executive director. A few questions, a few metrics that you could use just to look at the organization that you love the most and that you're a part of. I hope you enjoyed this information. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. If you have comments or ideas for future episodes, please reach out using the contact page on our website, jdlevyassociates.com.